There's lots of times in your life you're not going to be happy, and so that's not going to work. You want to have something meaningful. That's the boat that will take you through the storm.
This merged with a little bit of Aristotelian thought led me to the idea that when it comes to the mystical notion of the tree of good and evil in Eden, what is that supposed to be? What did people do wrong by eating from the tree of good and evil? And my feeling is that what they did wrong is that God created a universe in which the value was embedded in the object, right? In the same way that you, in your book, talk about if you're teaching a child about an object, the rules of the object are embedded in the teaching about the object. So you use the example of a vase. We were discussing this earlier, but you use the example of a vase where you teach a child, don't touch the vase because the vase will break. So that the rule is embedded in the object. In the same way, in Aristotelian thought, the rules for behavior are embedded in the nature of the universe, meaning what makes a man good is what makes a man unique, which is reason. The idea is that reason is what makes a man unique, so acting in accordance with right reason is what makes an action good. So if you believe that God created the universe along these lines, and that what natural law is just the human attempt to understand the lines along which God created the universe, then where human beings went wrong is when they decided to separate values from the universe. When we decided to take values and say this is a completely separate thing. So this vase has no rules attached to it anymore, it's just a vase. And we can construct the rules arbitrarily as to what to do with this vase. And so eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil changes the nature of good and evil from the universe comes along with a set of rules to human beings think that they can use their own intuition to supplant God's rules and to supplant universal rules with their own particular vision of what the universe ought to be. And at that point, they have to be expelled from Eden.
Yeah, well, okay. So that's also associated to some degree, I would say, with Milton's warning in Paradise Lost, because Milton basically portrays Lucifer, who's the bringer of light, weirdly enough, as the spirit of unbridled rationality, which accounts for, say, the Catholic Church's antagonism towards rationality. The idea was, same idea in the Tower of Babel, that human beings have a proclivity to erect their own dogmatic ethical systems, and then to expand them into a grandiosity that challenges the transcendent, and that's a totalitarian catastrophe. And for Milton, Satan was the spirit that eternally does that, right? Who says, everything I know is enough. That supplants what I don't know. That supplants the transcendent. And that's a catastrophe. How that's tangled up with the knowledge of good and evil, well, you're making some headway towards sorting that out. I mean, there is a cataclysm that's explained in the story of Adam and Eve, right? The cataclysm is the coming to wakefulness. And it's associated partly with recognition of nakedness, which is recognition of vulnerability and mortality, and the discovery of death, and then also the discovery of good and evil that goes along with that. So you said, well, that's partly the cognitive division of ethics from the facts of the object. So I have to think that through. I would also recommend to people, I think I mentioned this before, is Ian McGilchrist's book on the Master and His Emissary, because he looks at this neuropsychologically, right? And looks at the left hemisphere as the hemisphere that's dealing with the explicitly axiomatic systems, and the right hemisphere that's dealing with what those systems are embodied in. Okay, so part of what happens with the emergence of good and evil, as far as I could tell, it took me a long time to think about this, is that, and this is different than the hypothesis that you laid forward, which is why I can't reconcile them exactly, is you recognize you're naked. You know you can be hurt. You know you're vulnerable and insufficient. You hide from God, because that's what happens next. In this. And the reason you hide from God, say God is your destiny, or God is you're walking with God is a manifestation of your ultimate proper destiny. You doubt whether you're capable of that because now you realize your embodied finitude, your nakedness and insufficiency. So you hide and you're ashamed. So there's that. You also realize that you can be hurt and suffer. And that kind of goes along with God's command that you're going to work in the sweat of your brow and that you're going to die. And that women are going to be subjugated to men, which is put on as a curse, not as a moral imperative, right? But then what emerges out of that is that as soon as you know that you can be hurt, and this is what differentiates us from animals, and you really think that through, here's all the myriad ways I can be hurt, then you're angry about that because you can be hurt. But even worse, you can figure out how to hurt other people. And so that's part of that knowledge of good and evil. You associated it with this dissociation of the object from its ethical container.
Right, of the universe
Yeah.
as created by God from our interpretation of the universe, that there is a gap between the two, and that once human beings begin to supplant their own rationality for a telos, right, in the Aristotelian, the teleology, then what we end up doing is creating all sorts of awful systems that end up destroying us in the end.
There's something about that that's right. I mean, part of what happens in the New Testament, as far as I can tell, is that what Christ says, so he's trying to transcend the rule structure, right? Not because there's anything wrong with the rules. They're a necessary precondition for discipline, which is actually why I wrote 12 rules, right? It's like you need rules, but rules conflict and they don't always apply. And so there has to be an ethic underlying the rules, and you should have more respect for the ethic than for the rules.
Right.
Okay, Christ's idea, and this is part of the idea of the reestablishment of paradise, is that you should orient yourself towards the good. And that's something like an alliance with God. And then that you should tell the truth. And that's the ethic that generated the rules to begin with. Okay, and then we could be serious about this, you know, and we could say, well, how do you adjudicate the reality of that claim? All right, so then we might think, well, we already walked through the fact that the heroes of the past acted on potential to extract out the world of actuality. And if they did that properly, then the world they extracted was good. And that is a divine principle. And then we might say, well, is it a divine principle? And you might say, well, what is it that's acting through people in the good? Like the Christian theological answer to that would be the logos, right? That's the idea. That's the idea of the Holy Spirit, roughly speaking.
Right.
You might think, well, is that a real thing? It's like, well, to me, it's real the same way that consciousness is real. And we don't know the role of consciousness in determining reality. But even if you're an evolutionary biologist, and this is so interesting because the evolutionary biologists actually differentiated themselves from Darwin on this point. Like Darwin was very, very forthright in his claim that sexual selection was as powerful as natural selection, or even more so. And so here's where that goes. And because that brought consciousness into the world as an active player, the materialistic evolutionary biologists ignored that for like 150 years and only concentrated on natural selection, where they could play, well, this is all chance.
Right.
It's like, sexual selection is not chance. Okay, so here's a hypothesis. Human beings separated themselves from chimpanzees. One of the reasons they did that was because human females are sexually selective. Chimps aren't. Female chimps in estrus will mate with any chimp. The main chimps, the dominant ones, chase the subordinate males away. So they're more likely to have offspring, but it's not because of female choice.
Right.
Now, human females have done this whole different thing, is that they have hidden fertility, and they're much more likely to go after guys who have climbed up the hierarchy. So let's say heroes. We'll give the women some credit for intelligence, right? And say that that's what they're after. Even if they're using wealth and so forth and status as a marker, they're actually using those as a marker for competence.
Yeah, to stand in.
Yeah, and I think the evidence. Yeah, I think the evidence for that is clear. Okay, so you might say, oh well, it was human female conscious choice that selected us. Okay, and you think, well, that's not random. That's not random at all. It's the farthest thing from random that there is, and that means consciousness is making its choices with regards to what propagates. But then it's even more complex than that. So here's what happens among men. The men all get together in their hierarchy. They posit a valued goal. They all accept that as the goal, because otherwise they wouldn't be cooperating.
Right.
Then they arrange themselves into a hierarchy, and they let the most competent guys lead because they want to get to the promised land. They want to get the most competent leaders leading.
Right.
Competent defined by that value. Okay, so here's what happens essentially. The men all get together and vote on the good men. And the good men are then chosen by the women, and those are the people who propagate. And so it's like men are voting on which men get to reproduce, and women are going along with the vote and being even more stringent in their choices, let's say. And so then what you get is that the consciousness that through its active expression transforms the potential of the world into actuality also selects the direction of evolution. Right, and that's where the meme, Dawkins' term, turns into the biological reality. It's not this is something that's so cool about Dawkins. It's like, I've often thought this about Dawkins, is if he would push his thinking to the limits, he would fall right into Jung. Well, and then he'd be lost, of course, because that's a whole other universe. But if you take that meme seriously, like, and I mean really seriously, you think, yeah, there's some ways of conceptualizing that become so all-encompassing that
Powerful
they
hardwire themselves.
That's right. They start to become an actual force of evolution itself. And so then here's the case you could make. Consciousness extracts the proper world of being from potential through truth, and then it's good. It's like, okay, that's a hard one, man. That manifests itself in human beings at the individual level of individual consciousness. That's the logos within. That's the metaphysical foundation of the idea of natural right and responsibility. Okay, that's a bloody killer idea. That's expressed in the hero of heroes, that idea. That hero of heroes is the driving force behind human evolution. So not only do you get the action of the logos metaphysically as the process that extracts order out of chaos at the beginning of time, you also get it as the major driver of evolution. And so then you ask, okay, then what kind of reality does that have? Because you chase consciousness back, and like it disappears into the mystery of the past, and we have no idea what its relationship is with matter. But it's the force that gives rise to the cosmos and drives evolution. It's like you're getting pretty close to God there.
Yeah,
even just pragmatically speaking.
And you're certainly, not close to, but in the midst of an argument about free will, because obviously if you make the hard determinist argument that free will doesn't exist and that consciousness is merely a sort of trick that your brain is playing on itself, then how does culture propagate? How do these memes propagate? How are people choosing? Sexual selection and natural selection become one and the same as soon as you boil sexual selection down to natural selection. Right?
Well, and also I think the free will argument, I mean, I see why Harris gets tangled up in that, because, well, first of all, deterministic arguments are unbelievably powerful. And when we use deterministic models for many things, they really work.
Right.
So you could say, well, we're going to use that by default. It's like, fair enough. We're going to deviate from that with care. But I don't see people as driven like clocks winding down. First of all, we don't wind down in any simple way. We're dissipative structures. To use, he wrote Schrodinger, What is Life? A human being is a dissipative structure. We're not an entropic structure like a clock running down. I mean, we are in some sense, but as living beings, we pull energy in. And so we're not winding down like a deterministic structure. We're something other than that. And the way we treat each other is as logos, as far as I can tell. The way I treat myself, if I'm going to be good to myself, in the proper sense, is that I'm an active agent of choice confronting an infinite landscape of potential and casting that potential into a reality for good or for evil. Okay, and if I treat myself that way, then I have proper respect for myself and proper fear of myself, because I can make bad decisions and warp the structure of reality. And I think if you read Frankl, for example, or Solzhenitsyn, and you see how your bad decisions can warp the structure of reality, then that wakes you up, right? Okay, so there's that. If you don't treat yourself like an active agent, imbued with logos, then your life doesn't go well. But more, if you don't treat other people that way, they do not want to play with you. If we set up societies that aren't predicated on the idea that people are like that, then the societies they dissolve or they become totalitarian almost instantly. So then I would say, well, you've got the problem of determinism. It's like, fair enough, man. How do you reconcile the fact that if you lay out a society at every level of analysis on strict deterministic grounds, it fails? So doesn't that mean your hypothesis has a flaw? I mean, maybe not. Maybe you can say, no, the facts are independent of the ethical consequences.
Right, exactly. This is where the truth pragmatism question comes back into being, right? Because Sam would say, well, it's true regardless of what the effect is, and you would say, well, it's obviously not true if morals are constructed for a pragmatic reason, and if this pragmatism doesn't work, if it falls into nothingness.
Well, it also depends to some degree on how you're willing to test your hypothesis. Because I might say, well, if your hypothesis is factually correct, wouldn't you assume that if people based their behaviors individually and familial and socially on that set of facts, which is basically what Sam claims about facts to begin with, if you based your ethos on those facts, wouldn't it work?
Right.
Well, he claims that that's a test, and I would say, well, then it fails that test. It doesn't work. We have to treat each other like divine centers of consciousness in order for society to work.
Yes.
And I think, well, that's I can't see any way out of those arguments.
Yeah,
personally.
I can't either, obviously, which is why you and I agree on so much about this kind of stuff. And I think that it's also the reason why people find your work really inspiring. You know, while the left wants to claim that you are an angry person, or they'll claim similarly that I'm a deeply angry person, I don't think there's been quite an angry conversation. I'm pretty sure it has not been.
I'm horrified by what the radical left is capable of, but that doesn't make me angry.
Exactly. And I think that it's demonstrative of why so many people find what you're doing inspiring, because unlike the radical left, which is consumed with the idea of victimhood and victimology, and we're victims of the system, like Marxism makes the claim that the only way that people suck is the claim that Marxism makes, but the only way to cure people of sucking is by changing the entire system, which will, in some magical fashion, transform the nature of humanity.
Yeah, and in the proper direction.
Right, exactly. The claim that you're making, and I hope that I'm making as well, is that human beings do suck unless they decide to stop sucking, right? And your whole goal is to tell people exactly how it is that they can clean up their rooms, as your famous phrase goes.
Yeah, well, they might as well start with what's right in front of them. It's a lot harder than it looks, because to clean up your room means to accept that it's actually necessary for you to take that little bit of chaos that's in front of you, that chaotic potential, and cast it into habitable order. And then you have to develop the right attitude towards that. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to put my room in order. Well, what do you mean? Order is in relationship to something. You know, like if your desk is ordered, it means you've ordered it because you're going to work there, and you're working there on something valuable. And so the order is conceived of in relationship to a telos. It's like, okay, you're going to order your room. Well, what are you going to do in it? Like, what's your room for?
What's the purpose?
What's the purpose? You can't order your room without falling into purpose. And I would say, well, if you're going to fall into purpose, it's like, try it out on a local scale first, right? You don't want to go out there and change the system. It's like, what the hell do you know? Leave the system alone. See what you can do locally. See if you can put yourself together. See if you can put your immediate environment together. And you'll find, if you're in a chaotic household, and a chaotic household would be one where no one has any discipline, no one has any aims, and there's a terrible battle between Cain and Abel going on all the time, right? So life sucks and everything's miserable and we're cynical, and that's what wisdom is. It's like, and there's no point in trying anything because everything's meaningless, and who the hell's going to care in a million years, and you're a fool to move forward in any case. It's like, there's your household. Okay, and so now you decide, no, despite all that, I'm going to put my room in order. It's like, you will have a war on your hands. Because the first thing the people around you who are aiming down will do is think, oh, you really, eh? You think you're so much better than we are, do you? You really think that, you and your fancy goddamn plans. It's like, we're going to put every psychological obstacle we can possibly think of in your way. Because if you succeed, even in something that trivial, you shed a very dim light on our existence. And so we're going to do everything we can to take you out. And so people think, oh, well, cleaning your room, that's just a cliche. It's like, yeah, really, eh? Just go ahead and try it. You see how much of a cliche that is. And if you've got your room in order, then put your office in order. See, and then you're going to encounter as soon as you do that, you step out into the social world, you're going to encounter the antipathy between men and women. You're going to encounter the identity politics in the workplace. You're going to encounter how you regulate your sexual morality while you're working with people of the opposite sex. You're going to encounter the ethics that are necessary to move your business forward. It's like it's a microcosm, it really is. And so to take those microcosms seriously, well, that's what I'm asking people to do. And I'm saying, look, it isn't only about you being happy. It's like, yeah, whatever, happy. There's lots of times in your life you're not going to be happy, and so that's not going to work. You want to have something meaningful. That's the boat that will take you through the storm, right? When you batten down the hatches. But there's more. It isn't even that. It isn't even a meaningful, engaged life will see you through the catastrophes, even though that's a big deal, right? That's a great proposition, and I really believe it's true, because you can say to yourself, yeah, it's worth it. Right, and great, man. But there's the other part of it too, which is, don't be thinking that your errors aren't linked to hell, because they are. If you look at what happened in the 20th century, the brilliant commentators on the 20th century totalitarian states and all of their atrocities said the same thing over and over. It isn't top-down evil leader manipulating innocent masses. That's not it. It's the moral failings of every single individual, unwilling to say their truth, unwilling to act out what they know to be right, that accumulate and produce the catastrophic state. And so when you're fussing about with your life, when you're not manifesting your potential, when you're falsifying your speech and your actions in the service of short-term expedience, you are working to bring about hell on earth. And that's true. It's true literally, and then it's true, I suspect it's also true metaphorically. And that's a real truth, man. When you get the literal and the metaphorical working at the same time, it's like, that's real. So it isn't just that you have to fix up yourself so that, you can have a better life. It's like, who cares about you for a moment? It's you have to fix up your life, because if you don't, every time you make a mistake that you know to be a mistake, you're leading the world toward hell. And I believe that. I think it's true.
Well, Jordan Peterson's book is 12 Rules for Life. Honestly, we could do this all day long, and we'll certainly have you back. I really appreciate the time. There's a reason so many people follow Jordan. There's some reason so many people are buying this book. The book is fantastic, and his other book, Maps and Meaning, is also fantastic, so go out and get a copy of that as well. Jordan, thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. It was great. Yep.